A family of four embarked on what they hoped would be an unforgettable road trip through Death Valley, one of the most unforgiving and dangerous landscapes in all of America. With temperatures soaring past 115 degrees Fahrenheit and the land stretching endlessly into isolation, they vanished without a trace. No rescue, no clues, just a locked minivan, and an eerie silence that would last 13 years. For over a decade, no sign of the family emerged. Not a footprint, not a signal, until two unsuspecting hikers wandered off the beaten path and stumbled upon a discovery that would rewrite everything. This isn't just another missing person story. This is the haunting tale of the Death Valley Germans, a family whose dream adventure turned into a terrifying mystery that would stump authorities and grip investigators for years, all because of one wrong turn. It was July 27, 1996. A green Plymouth minivan was due to be returned to a rental agency in Los Angeles, but it never made it back. Instead, it sat partially buried under desert sand in one of the most remote regions of Death Valley. Inside, nothing. No sign of Edgar Remes, his girlfriend Cornelia Meyer, or their two young children. Just silence. To understand what went wrong, we need to go back to July 8, 1996. That day, four enthusiastic travelers from Dresden, Germany, arrived at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, full of excitement and dreams. 34-year-old Egbert Remes, an ambitious architect, was eager to show his family the beauty of the American Southwest. Alongside him was his 11-year-old son Georg Weber and his girlfriend, 27-year-old Cornelia Connie Meyer. With them was Connie's 4-year-old son, Max Meyer. This wasn't a spontaneous trip. They had planned meticulously, saved for months, and were ready to explore a new continent together. From Seattle, they flew to Los Angeles, where they picked up a green 1996 Plymouth Voyager minivan. Their first days were spent in Southern California, around the San Clemente area, enjoying the sun and settling into their journey. During the trip, Remes contacted his bank back in Germany and arranged for $1,500 to be wired to them in California. He even faxed his ex-wife asking for more funds, though the money never arrived. On July 22nd, as they made their way toward Death Valley, the heat reached a staggering 124 degrees Fahrenheit. The roads shimmered with heat, and even the air seemed to radiate danger, but the family felt ready. At Furnace Creek Visitor Center, they purchased German-language museum guides on Death Valley, possibly the only tools they had to navigate the extreme terrain. Instead of paying for a hotel, the family opted to sleep in their van that night at Hanapa Canyon near Telescope Peak. The next morning, July 23rd, they set off to explore, unaware that the land they admired would soon turn against them. The German family continued their journey through Death Valley, taking photographs and documenting their adventure with a Praktica 35mm film camera, unaware that these would be the last images they'd ever capture. Their stops included various tourist sites, and one key clue would later emerge from a seemingly harmless logbook entry. Investigators reviewing the visitor log at Warm Spring Mine, a remote point along a rough route between valleys, discovered an entry dated July 23rd. Written in German, it read, "We are going over the pass," and was signed by all four members, Connie, Egbert, George, and Max. The pass they mentioned was almost certainly Mangle Pass, a path that, on their German-language maps, looked like a manageable shortcut. But in reality, it was one of the harshest and most unforgiving desert routes in California, intended only for experienced drivers using four-wheel drive vehicles. The family's green Plymouth Voyager, a minivan made for highways and city roads, stood no chance against the brutal terrain. During their exploration, the family also visited the well-known geologist's cabin in Butte Valley. At some point, they removed and took with them an American flag that had been hanging at the cabin. It wasn't vandalism in the traditional sense. They likely saw it as a symbolic keepsake, not realizing its importance to the site or to local hikers and historians. It was a small, seemingly innocent decision that reflected how out of depth they were in such an extreme environment. As the sun blazed overhead and the heat intensified, the family made a fateful decision. Their museum guidebook, written in German, suggested an alternate route that appeared to be a quicker path back toward the main valley, a descent through a place marked as Anvil Canyon. But what the guy didn't say, and what the family couldn't have known, was that Anvil Canyon was not a road at all. It was a rugged mining trail, abandoned for decades, carved into the heart of one of the world's most brutal landscapes. And they were now on it in a vehicle entirely unfit for such a journey. By the time the sun set on July 23, 1996, the family was hopelessly stranded. They were deep within a part of Death Valley that offered no mercy, no shelter, and no means of escape. There was no cell service, no GPS, and no way to send out a distress call. Their minivan was trapped, the fuel likely depleted, and the vast desert around them stretched for miles in every direction. What began as a joyful, long-planned vacation had turned into a silent, deadly trap. They had plane tickets booked to return to Germany on July 27th, but they never boarded their flight. No check-ins, no departures, no evidence that they had ever left the country. Back in Germany, Egbert's ex-wife Heike Weber grew concerned when her son and former husband failed to return. Her concern turned to panic, and she began contacting authorities for answers. The German government reached out to American officials, but the case faced immediate challenges. There was no crime scene, no confirmed location, and no leads. With no witnesses and unclear jurisdiction, the investigation hit a wall. American authorities struggled to classify the case. The family hadn't broken any laws, nor were there any signs of a struggle. They had simply vanished. Theories began to swirl. Had they staged their own disappearance? Had something gone terribly wrong, or had Death Valley swallowed them whole without leaving a trace? The mystery only deepened with time. Then, months later, on October 21st, 1996, a possible breakthrough surfaced. While conducting a routine aerial sweep of the region for illegal drug activity, a common concern in remote desert locations, Park Ranger Dave Briner spotted something unusual. Flying over Anvil Canyon, roughly to point for miles downstream from a place called Willow Spring, he noticed a vehicle. It was out of place, a stranded green minivan in a location where no such vehicle should ever be. It wasn't a rugged truck or an off-road Jeep, it was a family car. And the moment Briner saw it, he knew something was terribly wrong. It was the first real sign of the missing German family, but it would take years for the full story to unravel. Anvil Canyon had long been a place of suspicion. Since the Desert Protection Act of 1994, it had been designated as an official wilderness area, making it off-limits to public vehicles. The old mining roads that traversed the area had been abandoned for decades, ever since the financial panic of 1907 forced the closure of many mining operations in Death Valley. The land had remained untouched for years, with few daring to explore its rugged and treacherous paths. When Park Ranger Dave Briner approached the vehicle in his helicopter, he knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. The 1996 Plymouth Voyager, a rental minivan, sat locked and abandoned in the middle of this desolate wilderness. The tires were completely flat, and the tracks around the vehicle painted a clear picture of desperation. Someone had tried to move the van, but despite their best efforts, the axles were buried deep in the sand. It was clear the van had been stuck here for a long time, but where were the passengers? Briner didn't waste any time and immediately called for backup. As he awaited reinforcements, he began gathering information that would ultimately lead to identifying the family that had rented the vehicle. The California Highway Patrol ran the license plate, and to their surprise, the vehicle had been reported stolen on September 10, 1996, by the Los Angeles Police Department. The minivan had been rented for German tourists on July 8th, the same family who had been missing for months. This discovery raised more questions than answers. Had the family been stranded here since late July? If so, where were they? Had they succumbed to the intense heat of the desert, or had they somehow survived for months without water and shelter? Survival in Death Valley, especially without proper supplies, would have been nearly impossible after just a few days of Exposure to such extreme conditions. The next day, on October 22, 1996, Death Valley National Park investigator Eric Iman arrived at the scene to conduct a thorough examination of the area. The sight around the vehicle was chilling. Aside from Briner's tracks, there were no other footprints to be seen. It was as if the family had vanished into thin air. Inside the van, however, investigators found a chilling snapshot of their journey. The van was packed with the usual items you'd expect from a family vacation: luggage, clothes, children's toys, camera equipment, and multiple rolls of film, all evidence of a holiday cut tragically short. There were also full bottles of beer and bourbon, sleeping bags, and camping gear, suggesting the family had been trying to make the best of a dire situation. Most significantly, the investigators found one of the German-language guidebooks that had been purchased at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center. This guidebook was crucial. It not only confirmed their route, but also highlighted how far off course they had traveled. One of the most telling items inside the van was an American flag taken from the geologist's cabin in Butte Valley. This proved the family had ventured to that remote location, adding another piece to the puzzle of their journey. Alongside it, there were food wrappers and signs of human waste, which indicated that the family had likely spent at least one night in the area. These findings suggested that the family had been stranded much longer than anyone had initially thought. The location of the van was at an altitude of about 3,000 feet, which meant that on July 23rd, the date investigators believed the family became stranded, the high temperature would have reached an unbearable 107 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, with the temperature only dipping to about 79 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. In these conditions, survival was possible only if the family had enough water and shelter. Without these vital resources, however, it was clear that their chances of survival would have been slim to none. The next day, on October 23, 1996, the van was carefully removed from Anvil Canyon. The recovery operation marked the beginning of what would become the largest search and rescue effort in the history of Death Valley National Park. Authorities hoped that this discovery would provide the break they had been searching for, but the deeper they dug, the more questions arose. The family's sudden and inexplicable disappearance remained one of the greatest mysteries in the park's history. As the sun rose on that fateful day, it set the stage for the most critical search operation the area had ever seen. The clock was ticking, and with every passing minute, the search for answers became more urgent. The discovery of the minivan had shifted what was initially considered a straightforward missing persons case into an intense race against time. While everyone involved understood that 3 months in the harsh desert heat meant survival was no longer a possibility, the mission now became a recovery effort, not a rescue. The first responders to arrive were the China Lake Mountain Rescue Group, followed by trackers from the Indian Wells Valley Search and Rescue Group. 8 mounted units from the Kern County Sheriff's Mounted Search and Rescue also joined the effort, using horses capable of covering the rough desert terrain that vehicles couldn't navigate. The search team spread out from Anvil Canyon, fanning out in different directions like spokes on a wheel, each group tasked with covering a specific sector of the unforgiving landscape. On the first day of the search, investigators stumbled upon a chilling clue that sent shivers down their spines. About 1.7 miles east of where the minivan had been discovered, a member of the China Lake Mountain Rescue Group noticed something out of place in the desert. Half buried in the sand, next to a scraggly bush, was a bottle of Bud Ice beer, a brand that had been found in the minivan. Nearby, someone had cleared a small ledge in the dirt, leaving behind a large seat print, suggesting that someone had sat there for a prolonged period of time. This discovery was both puzzling and eerie. It seemed to indicate that at least one of the German family members had walked east from their vehicle, but this new clue only deepened the mystery. If the family had ventured east, where did they go from there? Why had there been no further trace of them? What had happened to them? Day 2 brought an even larger search effort. Teams from Nye County, Nevada, and Inyo County, California arrived, along with 2 helicopters that joined the operation, their blades beating a rhythmic sound over the vast desert as they scoured the land for any trace of the missing family. The search expanded to cover more of Anvil Canyon, portions of Warm Spring Road, Butte Valley, Mingle Pass, and the route that linked the canyon to the main valley. The teams involved were highly experienced professionals, many with decades of desert rescue experience. They were skilled at reading the desert landscape, able to spot subtle signs of human passage through this hostile environment. Every wash, cave, and shelter was meticulously checked, places where a desperate family might have sought refuge from the punishing heat. But despite their best efforts, the desert revealed nothing, not a single trace of the missing family. On October 25th, different search teams spread out even further, covering even more ground across Death Valley. One team focused on the area between Anvil Canyon and Badwater Road, while another from Victorville combed the southeast edge of the valley. A ranger from the Bureau of Land Management conducted a search on the west side of Mangle Pass, between Barot and Barker Ranch. A group from Lake Mead surged from Anvil Canyon, crossing the mountains into Butte Valley. The Indian Wells team carefully combed the area around Willow Spring. At the top of Anvil Canyon, another group from the China Lake Mountain Rescue Group began searching from the center of Anvil Canyon, working their way north and west. Despite their relentless efforts, the search turned up no new evidence or clues. On October 26th, the fourth and final day of the search, teams continued their meticulous search for any sign of the missing family. They scoured the remaining areas where the family might have wandered, checking every possible shelter, cave, and hiding spot where they could have sought refuge. The heat and the harsh desert conditions had not given up any more answers, and as the final day came to a close, it became painfully clear the search had yielded no sign of the family, and the mystery of their disappearance seemed even more impenetrable than before. The search for the missing German family continued, spanning across the harsh and unforgiving landscape of Death Valley. Despite the growing odds, teams from various agencies worked tirelessly to cover every inch of the vast desert, focusing on areas where a lost person might have sought shelter. The Death Valley National Park team concentrated their efforts on the rugged areas north of Warm Spring Canyon, as well as nearby mine sites where someone stranded might have found some cover from the scorching heat. At the same time, the Victorville team directed their search around the area of Stripe Butte, while the Lake Mead team moved along Warm Spring Canyon Road, hoping to find any sign of the family. Bureau of Land Management (BLM) Rangers focused on the west side of Mangle Pass, as well as the nearby routes that the family could have used if they had tried to head toward Barot. The Indian Wells team, following a promising clue in the form of footprints, expanded their search around Warm Spring Road and West Side Road, hoping that they had tracked the family's movements. With the search area now so extensive, a new team from Apple Valley was brought into focus specifically on West Side Road, heading north from Warm Spring Canyon Road. They hoped that this area might have provided shelter for the family as they tried to navigate the unforgiving terrain. Adding to the effort, two helicopters were dispatched to scan the skies above Anvil Canyon and its southern regions, but strong winds made it challenging to conduct a thorough aerial search. Despite the helicopter's best efforts and the team's tireless work on the ground, no new clues or evidence emerged from the desert. The only tangible discovery to date remained the beer bottle, half buried in the sand on the first day. It seemed as though the vast desert had swallowed up the family entirely, leaving no trace behind. With each passing day, the hope of finding the family alive diminished. Finally, after days of exhaustive searching, the official search operation was called off. A spokesperson for Death Valley National Park confirmed that around 250 people had participated in the search, spreading across various teams and areas to cover as much ground as possible. They had focused on the most likely locations, but still, no trace of the missing family could be found. The search had been thorough, and yet the desert had revealed no answers. The case, once filled with so much hope, was now filed away, joining the long list of America's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. As the weeks and months passed without any further developments, conspiracy theories began to emerge, some more elaborate and outlandish than others. One of the most outlandish theories suggested that Egbert Remes, the father of the family, had been attempting to reach the China Lake Naval Weapons Center, seeking classified information about hybrid propulsion technology. According to this theory, the family had either been recruited into a secret government program or eliminated because they had seen something they were not supposed to. The theory gained some traction because of Eggert's profession as an architect and rumors about his supposed interest in exotic technologies. However, those who knew him personally quickly dismissed these ideas, labeling them as nothing more than wild speculation. Egbert Remes was a family man, someone dedicated to his loved ones, not a covert spy. Another theory that circulated suggested that the family had staged their own disappearance. Some of Eggert's colleagues recalled his talk of moving to Costa Rica and starting fresh in a new country, away from everything they knew. Perhaps Death Valley had been chosen as the perfect place to vanish because it was so remote and inhospitable. No one would ever think to search for them in such a harsh environment. But this theory also had its flaws. Why would anyone choose to disappear in one of the most dangerous places on Earth? Why would they risk the lives of two young children for such a complicated deception? And how could a family, including a 4-year-old, maintain such a secret for so long without anyone catching on? The theories grew even darker as some suggested that the family had fallen victim to foul play. Given the remoteness of the area, some speculated that the family may have encountered criminals, desert drug manufacturers, human traffickers, or other dangerous individuals who might have seen the family as either a threat or an opportunity. Death Valley, with its vast emptiness and hidden corners, offered plenty of space for those who wished to dispose of evidence or erase traces of their crimes. The family, unsuspecting tourists in an unforgiving wilderness, may have stumbled into something far darker than they could have ever imagined. Despite all these theories, none could offer any concrete answers. The case of the missing German family became a haunting mystery, a story with no closure, no resolution, and no explanation. As time went on, Death Valley's desert remained as silent and unyielding as ever, hiding the family's fate beneath its scorching sands. For years, their disappearance would linger in the minds of investigators and conspiracy theorists alike, a tragedy that would remain one of the most baffling unsolved mysteries in American history. Tom Mahout, a seasoned professional investigator, had years of experience in both search and rescue operations and the science of survival. He worked for Los Angeles County, and his expertise in tracking and finding what others had lost made him an invaluable asset in many rescue operations. But in 2009, 13 years after the disappearance of the German family, Mahout came across their case, and it haunted him. The tragedy of four people vanishing without a trace was striking, but what truly caught Mahout's attention were the logical inconsistencies in the way the case had been handled. Something about the investigation didn't add up, and as a professional, he couldn't let it go. Approaching the case like an engineer would tackle a complex problem, Mahout began to break the mystery down into smaller, manageable parts. He examined each detail with fresh eyes and a critical mind. His theory was simple. The search teams had been looking in all the wrong places. Using the German-language guidebook that had been found in the minivan, Mahout retraced the family's likely route. The guidebook showed a path heading west through Butte Valley, then toward Mengele Pass, past the infamous Barker Ranch, where Charles Manson's followers had once hidden. From there, the family would have likely continued north to the ghost town of Barat before making their way to the more populated and accessible areas around Yosemite National Park. When viewed through this new lens, the family's movements suddenly made sense. On July 23rd, they had left their campsite at Hanapa Canyon and started heading south on Warm Spring Road. Initially, the road would have seemed perfectly fine, encouraging them to keep moving toward their next destination. They probably stopped at Warm Spring Camp to ask for information about road conditions ahead, but when they found only a deserted mining camp, They signed the register and pressed on. Their next stop was the geologist's cabin in Butte Valley. Once again, they hoped to find someone who could provide guidance about the road ahead. But when they found it empty, they impulsively took the American flag as a souvenir, likely unaware of the significance of their actions. Still determined to continue, they pressed on toward Mingle Pass, but the pass proved impassable for their minivan. Here, the guidebook presented what seemed like a potential alternative route, Anvil Canyon, a road that appeared to lead back to the main valley. Faced with a difficult choice, turn back or try the shorter route, the family chose to keep going. Mahout's theory diverged significantly from the conclusions reached by the official search teams, particularly in one key area. While the standard search and rescue protocols suggested that lost people usually try to return to their last known safe location, Mahout theorized that Egbert Remes, the family's father, would have seen something different when he looked at his map. He noticed the proximity of the China Lake Naval Weapons Center, which was only 8 or 9 miles to the south. To a desperate father trying to save his family, a military base would have seemed like salvation, a place where there were people, water, and the possibility of radio communication or help. The hills between the stranded van and the base didn't look insurmountable on the map, and to someone unfamiliar with the true nature of Death Valley's unforgiving terrain, it might have seemed like a manageable distance to travel. Mahout believed that the family had spent at least one night by the van, as evidenced by the waste material found nearby. Then, after locking the vehicle, they had made the decision to head south in search of help. Mahout's analysis painted a much different picture than the official search teams had followed. Instead of heading east or north, as many had assumed, he believed the family had gone south, hoping to reach the military base. It was a choice driven by desperation, a choice that made perfect sense to Mahout. Considering the circumstances, Mahout's theory set the stage for a dramatic new understanding of the family's disappearance. His fresh approach, based on logic and a deep understanding of the terrain, provided a new angle on a case that had confounded authorities for over a decade. But it also raised more questions. Had they truly traveled south, and if so, what had happened to them in the harsh desert landscape that had already claimed so many lives? From the moment the beer bottle was discovered, Mahout's theory took shape. The family, having abandoned the van, had turned south, possibly seeking salvation at the China Lake Naval Weapons Center. However, this path had been overlooked by official searches, who dismissed the notion that anyone would venture into such harsh, unforgiving terrain. They argued that experienced desert travelers would never make such a dangerous decision, but Mahout's theory was based on the fact that the German family were not experienced desert trekkers. They were ordinary tourists with limited resources, armed with incomplete maps and a desperate drive to save their children from the oppressive heat and isolation. They had no understanding of the brutal realities of Death Valley and the severe risks involved in attempting to traverse its vast, empty stretches. For them, a military base would have seemed like the best chance for survival, a place with people, water, and a way to call for help. In 2009, 13 years after the disappearance, Mahout couldn't let the mystery go. He made the decision to personally search the area with his colleague Les Walker. Together, they ventured southeast of Galola Wash, about 8 miles from the spot where the family's minivan had been abandoned and just 4 miles from the China Lake Naval Weapons Center's boundary fence. The terrain was treacherous and remote, making it difficult for the official search teams to cover such an expansive area. What Mahout and Walker would find there would finally provide the answers that had eluded authorities for over a decade, and would bring a measure of closure to the family members who had been left waiting for so long. On November 12, 2009, Mahout and Walker stumbled upon a heartbreaking discovery: the remains of Cornelia Meyer, scattered across roughly 150 meters of desert floor. Among the remains were her passport and bank identification, both of which confirmed her identity. The grim search continued as Walker found a toothbrush and a tube of salve or toothpaste in the area. A small shoe, either a woman's or possibly a child's, was discovered to the northwest. As they continued their search, they found a portion of Cornelia's daily planner littered with business cards from various places the family had visited on their trip. In addition to these items, they found a 2-liter wine bottle, which seemed to connect back to the family's earlier journey, and further downstream. A clear bottle, later identified as one of the Budweiser bottles originally found in the minivan. In the following days, Mahoud and Walker's search led them to further discoveries: the remains of Egbert Remes, the father of the family. The location of his remains was precisely where Mahoud's theory had predicted. It was in terrain so rugged and remote that it was clear why previous search efforts had failed to locate the family. The Remes family had indeed traveled south from their stranded van, desperately trying to reach the China Lake military facility. But unbeknownst to them, the base was likely deserted, with no permanent personnel to offer any kind of rescue. What they had mistaken for a path to safety had instead been a final, tragic journey into a death trap. The discovery brought an end to 13 years of speculation, conspiracy theories, and unanswered questions. What had once been the subject of wild rumors was now revealed as a tragic series of decisions made by a family in crisis. There had been no government cover-up. There had been no staged disappearance. There was no elaborate conspiracy. The family had made the logical decisions any parent might make in such a situation. They were simply trying to survive. But in doing so, they unknowingly made choices that led them into the very dangers they had been trying to escape. Over the course of the next few days, subsequent searches uncovered more remains, but there wasn't enough DNA evidence to confirm the identities of the 2 children. Despite this, the mystery of the Death Valley Germans had finally been solved, putting to rest years of uncertainty and fear. The discovery of their remains marked the end of one of America's most haunting unsolved cases. The story of the Death Valley Germans is ultimately a tragedy fueled by good intentions and bad information. It is the story of a family who, rather than succumbing to the violence of the desert, became victims of their own lack of knowledge about the dangers they faced. Had they understood the true peril of their situation, perhaps they could have made different decisions. Yet, their story teaches us something profound about human nature, about the power of hope and survival instinct that drives people to make extraordinary choices in extraordinary circumstances. It also shows the lengths to which a family will go to protect each other, to try to hold onto the belief that there is always hope, even when the reality is too harsh for them to understand. Egbert Remes had set out with the purest of intentions, to show his son and his girlfriend's child the wonders of America. It was meant to be a journey of discovery, a road trip that would open their eyes to the beauty and grandeur of a new land. Cornelia Meyer, embracing adventure with the man she loved, joined him on this trip. For 11-year-old George, it was a world beyond the familiar streets of his small German city, offering him a chance to experience the vastness of the American landscape. Little Max, only 4 years old, was simply along for the ride, trusting his caregivers to protect him, not knowing how much they would all be tested. What began as an exciting and hopeful vacation, however, soon descended into a nightmare, one that would forever alter their lives and leave a haunting trail of unanswered questions. The family's choices seemed logical, even practical. At the time, when their first route proved impossible, they didn't hesitate to try another. When their vehicle became stranded in the harsh desert, they made the difficult decision to walk toward what they believed was their best hope for rescue, a military facility marked on their maps. But each step they took, each decision they made, led them further into a trap they could never have anticipated. What seemed like an alternative route to safety became their ultimate undoing. In the end, the decisions made with the best intentions to find shelter, to find help, led to tragedy. Yet, in their hearts, they believed they were doing what was necessary to survive. However, the real heroes of this story are not the family that fell victim to the unforgiving desert. Instead, they are the ones who refused to give up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Tom Mahoud and Les Walker, 2 dedicated individuals, took it upon themselves to solve a mystery that that had baffled professionals for over a decade. In 2009, 13 years after the family's disappearance, Mahout read about their case and could not let it go. His determination to find the truth, no matter how difficult, was what ultimately brought the family's story to a conclusion. He and Walker spent countless hours researching, hiking through dangerous terrain, and following logical threads that had been dismissed by official searches. Together, they combed areas that others had overlooked, piecing together the family's movements and, at last, finding the answers that had eluded investigators for so many years. Their dedication brought closure to the families who had been left in the dark for so long. The German families in Dresden, who had spent over a decade grieving without answers, were finally able to hold memorial services with certainty about what had happened to their loved ones. For years, they had been unable to move forward in their grief, but now, with the mystery solved, they could begin the painful process of healing. The long wait for answers had come to an end, and although the family's story was tragic, the truth finally allowed those left behind to say goodbye in the only way they could, with knowledge, with closure. Mahout later expressed frustration with the lack of cooperation from some authorities, noting that without his and Walker's relentless efforts, the remains might never have been found. Their success, where professional search teams had failed, is a testament to the power of persistence, fresh thinking, and a willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. Mahout and Walker's ability to think beyond the obvious allowed them to discover what the official searches had missed. Their work serves as a reminder of how crucial it is to approach cold cases with new perspectives, and how dedication can make all the difference in bringing closure to families who have been waiting for years. But the story of the Death Valley Germans also serves as a sobering reminder of the dangers of America's wilderness areas. Death Valley is as beautiful as it is brutal, a stunning, desolate landscape that can mesmerize the unprepared and mislead those who don't understand its harsh realities. Every year, people venture into these remote regions unaware of the dangers that lie in wait. The story of the German family serves as a warning to all those who might underestimate the desert's power. Their tragic journey reminds us of the importance of being prepared, to carry enough water and food when venturing into desert areas, to use vehicles appropriate for the terrain, and to always inform others of your itinerary before setting out. Communication devices, like satellite phones, can make the difference between life and death, and one should never rely solely on outdated maps that may not reflect the current state of the terrain. The Death Valley Germans, in a sense, have become part of American folklore. Their story is retold as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It is a reminder of the dangers that lie in wait in remote wildernesses, but it also speaks to the power of hope, the hope that even in the face of overwhelming odds, people can survive, can endure, and can be found. Their story reminds us that every missing person case is more than just a headline or a statistic. Behind every missing person is a family, a life, a story, and answers that need to be found. No matter how long it takes, the search for the truth will never cease. Ultimately, the Death Valley German story serves as a poignant reminder of the extraordinary lengths people will go to for the ones they love. It teaches us about human resilience, about hope, and the deep instinct to protect those we care for. And in the face of overwhelming challenges, their story proves that sometimes, when it seems like hope is lost, the human spirit can be stronger than even the most unforgiving desert.